We're live. Oh, you're there. You're there with me. Okay. We had some technical difficulties. Had to reboot my computer 2 minutes before airtime, but we're back here, Keith.
Where's the live chat? What happened to the chat? It was on
The chat will be on YouTube.
But usually I see it when we're talking, so we can.
Oh, you see it on YouTube, right? Don't you?
No, while we're doing this, I see that I see people.
Not on Zoom.
Oh.
Zoom broadcasts it to YouTube.
Hey, listen, how many times have we done this now?
This is the 6th one we've done together.
Yeah.
We are. Okay.
So here we are, and everyone's live. We're live right now.
Yeah. Here, I'll give you the link so you can see the chat. Let's see, it's under chat here. See what people don't understand is we're doing this on Zoom, and Zoom broadcasts it to YouTube because YouTube incredibly doesn't have this basic feature. All right. So did you get it? The chat there, you can see the chat where everybody's there. Shalom, everybody. Welcome to Hebrew Voices live from quarantine number 7 with Nehemia Gordon and my special guest, Keith Johnson.
So this
Shalom,
is
Nicholas. Shalom, Wanda Craig. Oh, Melissa Raid from California. Shalom. Shalom, Kathleen and Adarito Villar. Go on, Keith.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's been one of those days, Nehemia.
One of those days.
Yes, you can say things like, things are just a little harried right now. Can you hear all of the noise and things? Yeah,
I can only hear you. I don't hear what.
Okay, that's good because the dog was barking a few seconds ago. I was about to get my BB gun.
You have a dog?
No, the neighbor's dog was barking. I was about to go get
one that you shot in the tuchus?
No, a new one. I was about to go in.
Same neighbor?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So here we go, my friend.
We're here. We're live.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people been waiting to hear from you on some questions that they sent in.
Hear from me.
But before we get started, I want to ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
Do you know that as of right now, I'm no longer under quarantine?
Really? You're
Yes.
finally not under quarantine. Okay.
Yes, I'm able to move about freely.
Congratulations.
When I say move about freely, I mean walk around and.
Now the whole country's under quarantine. But whatever.
And now I can walk around freely. But yeah, no. It's really interesting. We still have such a high percentage of people. Now they're not talking about quarantine. We're talking about the difference between quarantine and sheltering in place. So sheltering in place meaning doing all the things that we're supposed to do, that we need to do, distancing, hand washing. It's my understanding now that a lot of governors are actually suggesting strongly that people, when they leave the house, should be wearing masks. And so
I went out today and I wore a mask and gloves.
Did you really?
I did.
Where did you go, Nehemia?
I did not go to Walmart. I went to Home Depot.
Oh, you went to Home Depot. So you really so anyway.
And Costco.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on. But now they're talking pretty seriously about ways to open up society. And I know there's a lot of controversy about that back and forth. And there's a lot of people that are saying that, can you do both? And how do you do both? But is it fair to say that however we knew life before all of this, it won't be that for some time? Normalcy is probably far ways away from us. Would you agree?
I don't know about that. Well, normalcy, I don't know that we'll ever go back to exactly the way things were before.
Mm-hmm.
There are going to be some changes, maybe. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But at the very least, it depends on, we don't have a lot of good information, but based on the original study that was published in, I think it was the King's College Journal or something like this, they said that this is, they're looking at a second wave coming in October and November. So there could be a summer respite, but we don't know that for sure. We know that's what their models said. Now the models we're hearing are different. I mean, who knows? Who really knows?
Well, either way, we've been doing this. This is our 7th one, Nehemia, and 7's the number of completion. And the reason I say that is because I'm not in quarantine. I'm not in quarantine anymore. So now we got to come up with something different. But listen, before we get into all that,
but the nation is in quarantine. That's what it means. I mean,
yeah,
lockdown. We could call it live from lockdown. I mean, you're right. You're right. Technically, you were officially in quarantine.
Yeah.
That's why we called it live from quarantine. But hey, whatever.
Yeah. Here we go. So before we get started,
yes.
Let's say a prayer, each of us. And I know for myself, I need a little peace There's so much that's been going on today. It's just absolutely crazy. So, but I'd like to pray for a little peace. Can I do that?
Bevakasha.
Okay. Father, thank you for technology, the challenges of it and the blessings of it. Thank you for the people that are tuning in right now and those that will tune in the future. Thank you for the journey that Nehemia and I have been on, and that we found common ground in the Word of God. And we pray that as a result of that, that someone would be blessed by this process, that someone would be touched, someone would be inspired. Thank you for all that we've done so far and the many people that are encouraged. We pray that you'll continue to lead us and guide us in your grace, and we thank you in advance in your name. Amen.
Amen. Yehovah Avinu Shabbat Yehovah our Father in heaven, thank you for a wonderful Chag HaMatzot, a wonderful feast of Passover. Even though we couldn't be with loved ones, a family as we have in the past, and many people were alone. Yehovah, thank you for us getting through this. Through technology, we're able to connect with people. Yehovah, as we are counting the Omer, be with us through this 50 days. Let this be a 50-day period where things go back to some degree of normalcy, and this disease passes from the world. Yehovah, you are the healer. You can do this. You can heal.
Yes.
Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Amen, Nehemia. So last time that we talked, we discussed the idea of some people asking some questions. And I have to tell you, I am really a little overwhelmed at how many people had questions regarding the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. But before we get to the questions, can I just set a little context, which you always do in Hebrew Voices? You know, you always set the context. And so, and now, you know, this is shifting today, right? Like I get to ask you questions. And
are you turning the tables on me?
I'm turning the tables on you. But before I do that, I want to tell people a very quick little story that changed my life. And it has to do with you and I walking the old city of Jerusalem. And we were walking and talking about the Bible. You may remember it.
I do.
And as we were walking and talking about the Bible, I bring something up. And we must have spent all day doing this. And we'd sit down and you'd open up a Bible that looked just like my Bible on the outside. Outside of the Bible looked just like my Bible. So we'd sit down and we'd open the Bible, and then you would speak what you read in your Bible, and you'd say it in English. So I just assumed that there was maybe just a little bit of a different translation, but basically the same Bible. And after about 5 or 6 questions, after 2 or 3 hours walking up hills, walking down, I went and peeked over your shoulder, and I saw something that really, let me just say it this way, frustrated me. Over your shoulder, you were reading from the Hebrew Bible and translating in English. And I had no idea that you were doing that. And when I looked at the Hebrew, I thought, well, that's the Hebrew from, like, you know, for scholars. That's not. What is he doing? And it changed my life. And do you remember what I said to you then, Nehemia, when I saw you doing that?
Remind me what you said.
I said to you, how can you do that? What? And tell me, come on, come back to those days. Like, it really changed my life. That you were translating in English from Hebrew. Why was that something that was so natural for you?
I mean, look, I was talking with somebody yesterday and teaching this person the Hebrew alphabet, the Aleph Bet, and I was asked the question, when did you learn the Aleph Bet? And I said, well, I mean, I learned it in kindergarten, the same time I learned as the English alphabet. You know, in kindergarten, in my upbringing, we had this table, and the table would have, let's take Gimel, a really easy one. And so it was Gimel with a patach, and then Gimel with a chirik, and Gimel with a tzere. So it was, you know, ga, gi, ge, ge, gu, right? That's how you learn. That's how you learn the language. You see each letter combined with each one of the vowels. There are 22, really you could say it's 23 letters, because shin and sin. And then you combine it with each one of the 8 or so vowels, depending how you count them. Call them 8. And if you include the chatafs, then there's 11, right? So you've got 11 letters times, 11 vowels times 23 consonants. I'm pulling up my computer here. And that means you have 253 letter vowel combinations that you have to learn. And that doesn't even include the dagesh, which adds a certain number more as well. So let's say that adds another, so we're going to call it 33. 286 combinations, and you just go through that over and over and over in kindergarten. And then you get to first and then second grade, and then you start reading the Torah. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz v'haaretz hayta tohu v'vohu v'choshech al pnei tahom v'ruach Elohim ma'achepet al pnei hamayim. So you just see, and the way we learned it, and I was in the U.S. Growing up, it was the rabbi would recite Bereshit bara Elohim es hashamayim es haaretz, and we would repeat, and then he would say the translation, and we would repeat the translation, and verse by verse, that's how you would learn it. And then at some point, once you have a big enough vocabulary, then they introduce grammar. See, in universities, they want to do it backwards. They want to start with the grammar.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said for that method, but I don't know. That's not how children learn. They learn through immersion by just translating over and over and over, and eventually it's in your soul, it's in your bones.
Okay, so Nehemia, I want you to stick your chest out a little bit. I know you don't like doing this, but I used to always make fun because I used to love it when I first met you. They said to me, we're going to go meet this guy. His name is Nehemia Gordon from the Hebrew University. And I'm like, why do I want to meet him? I don't know who this guy is. And it absolutely changed my life. Tell us just a little bit before we get into this, your journey from the United States to Hebrew and at Hebrew University.
So one of the things I was told is, how dare you question these rabbis, these generations of rabbis who wrote all these books and they're so knowledgeable. They say that this is what the Bible means. How do you think you know any better? And so one of my objectives was that I would know Hebrew better than these rabbis, or at least as well as these rabbis. And part of that required me moving to Israel. So I moved to Israel actually initially when I was 17 years old, just out of high school. And I worked on a kibbutz for a year. And I remember I was out there in the fields, and I could read Hebrew. I could read biblical Hebrew in particular. I was out there working as a field worker, and my boss would start yelling at me in Hebrew, take those pipes and move them over there. Hook up that pipe and disconnect that other pipe. And I had no idea what he's saying. It was like, but he's pointing. So I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that must be the word for pipe. That's the word in Samuel that I remember. David said, whoever gets into the city of Jerusalem first, he'll reward him. And then it says, and Joab touched the pipe, the tzinor, right? And there, it's even unclear what that Hebrew word means, but clearly in modern Hebrew, it meant any kind of pipe, an irrigation pipe.
Yes.
So, the water channel, they understand it as, at one time they understood it as referring to Warren's shaft. Now it's kind of disputed, but it's in the translations based on that understanding. So this is how I came to speak modern Hebrew. And it did help me with understanding the Tanakh. And in some ways, it helped. In some ways, you could even say it hindered, because I would read a word and say, oh, wait, I know what this means. And then you're like, oh, that's not what it means in biblical Hebrew.
See, here's something really interesting. And listen, now you still didn't stick your chest out, so I'm going to stick it out for you. You went to the Hebrew University, you got your undergraduate, I think it was in biblical studies and archaeology.
I did a double major, that's correct.
And then you went and got your master's degree, and you also got that in biblical studies, if I'm correct.
My master's in biblical studies,
yeah. Master's in biblical studies. So I'm sitting here with you in the old city of Jerusalem. I'm looking over your shoulder, and I'm looking at my study Hebrew Bible. That's a Bible you just put in the libraries, and you go and find little words to impress people. It's not something that you actually read. And so you're reading it, and I'm like, wait a minute, where's his references, and how's he checking? And it really, really, really shook me. It changed my life. And after that, I asked you a question. Do you remember what I asked you? No, you don't. I said, Nehemia, would you be willing to help me learn to do that? Would you be willing to help me? And what did you say? Tell the people what you said.
They said, no, I don't want to. That's what the inner voice said anyway.
You said no. No. And I want you to be honest. Part of the reason that you said no was why? I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, I said to you,
you're a Christian. You don't really want to learn Hebrew. This is some agenda to try to get into my good graces, so that you could eventually spring the Jesus trap on me. Yes. And I don't even want to start with that. Look, and this doesn't come from nowhere. I remember I was sitting around with a bunch of folks in Jerusalem, and one of them had told us about how he got a job working at this yeshiva. And the first question they asked him is, do you believe in Jesus? And he said, no. And he's talking to the people. He realized who I was, but then he figures, okay, I can talk, I can talk openly. And he says, oh, don't use that name. I call him Yeshua. And so in his mind, it was okay to lie to the people, because he understood what they really asking is, are you here to try to convert the students?
Yeah.
And 100%, he told us that was his objective. He was working as a janitor, as a volunteer janitor at this yeshiva, so he could befriend the students, so he could spring Yeshua on them.
Okay.
In some kind of friendly conversation. And I've heard these stories for not generations, because I haven't been alive, but I've heard these stories for my whole life.
Yes.
That this is what Christians sometimes do. Not all Christians, obviously, but this is all I knew, right? That this is something, like there's a story of the woman. She goes knocking on the door of this family in the middle of nowhere in Israel, in this small little village, in this moshav or yeshuv. And she says, it's an hour, 15 minutes before Shabbat, and I have nowhere to stay with my family. And they bring them in, and then they, they're doing the kiddush and everything, and having the family Friday night meal, and they start. And this is a way of befriending them so they could share Yeshua. And so I thought, surely this is some trap where he wants to spring the Jesus trap on me. That's what he's a Methodist. That's what they do.
Okay, so is it fair to say, Nehemia, that we went into, after it took a long time for you to convince?
And let me just say this is how Jews perceive Christians, for better or for worse. You know the story of the and I've learned now over the years that that's not all Christians, but a lot of Jews is how they perceive Christians. And sometimes it's an earned perception, like I gave with these examples, and it's kind of the story of the scorpion. The story of the scorpion and the frog, or some people have it as a turtle. So the scorpion says to the frog, "I will need to get across the water. Would you let me go on your back?" And the frog says, "Well, no, you'll sting me." He says, "If I sting you, I'll drown." And the frog thinks about it. He's like, "Oh yeah, you're right." So he takes him across on his back, and halfway through, the scorpion stings the turtle or the frog. And as he's drowning, he says, "Why did you do that?" He says, "I'm a scorpion."
That's what I do.
So that's what I do. And this is how Jews at least perceive Christians, for better or for worse. And one of the things you did that I really appreciate, it's now been 17 or 18 years, and you still haven't.
We've been. How long have we been together now?
I think it's 18 years. If I'm not mistaken, or maybe even 19. You still haven't sprung the Jesus trap on me, at least the conversion trap. And here it is.
And now here we are.
The moment he's been building up for 18 years, the moment he's been waiting for.
I've got all my friends.
Now he's got Nehemia to trust him.
Yeah, these questions are going to, no, and Nehemia, let me just say something. So it took you a long time to agree to actually do what I was asking you to do. It took some months, and then you called me back. Those days,
it was a lot more than months, and a lot of that had to do with that there is this perception, this maybe even generational experience that Jews have of dealing with Christians. Whenever we talk about Jesus, it ends up badly. And there is something to be said for this. Yeah. I've had conversations with people early on in my experience where people would say, "Nehemia, why is it that you don't believe in X, Y, Z, or why do you believe X, Y, Z?" And when I told those people, they got very upset.
Yeah.
Because they assumed, well, he doesn't have an answer. Yeah. Let's challenge him and he'll see he doesn't have an answer. And when they see I do have an answer, they get upset. Wait a minute. This isn't what we believe. How dare you? This is blasphemy you've spoken.
Well, here's the beautiful thing. So then in the process,
it's like the woman, if you don't want to know how you look in the jeans, don't ask me.
So you and I have been in this process, and you created what I would call a very intense study process.
Yes.
Really intense.
Oh yeah.
And we went through that process together of learning lots and lots of things. And I cannot tell you how much I've appreciated what you did over the years. And then you came to me after we had gone through this entire study process. I don't remember, 2-3 years, maybe longer. Then you came and you said, "Hey, Keith, listen, everyone heard about the 2 rules. You said, I'd like to study with you the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew." And I got very excited. And you sent me what was called a primitive text of the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. I actually have it upstairs.
The Gospel of Matthew according to a primitive Hebrew text by George Howard.
By George Howard. And so George Howard had created this, it wasn't even in book form. It was like in a, what was it, like a...
Well, what I had done is I went to the library at Mount Scopus, and because you can't buy this book, it was printed in 1987.
Yeah.
And then the second edition 1995 was completely different than the first edition,
Yeah.
at least as pertains to the introduction and the conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't change his introduction or conclusion. He just said, okay, I have this other information now to share.
Mm-hmm.
And he just, I don't know why he did that. So I guess it was more politically correct if we're really honest. So I went to the library at Mount Scopus where I was studying my master's degree, and I photocopied the book. I was
Yeah.
going to say I scanned it, but they didn't have scanners,
Yeah.
at least not at the library back then. I went there and I photocopied the book, and I had it bound with like this
Yes.
plastic like ring
I
binding.
still have it upstairs.
You still have it? Wow.
And listen to what I want to
have
tell
it in
people.
Jerusalem. Yeah.
I want to tell people something because there's an agenda that I have in why I'm having you go through this.
Okay.
There was no shortcuts with you regarding what it was that I was asking that I wanted to learn. And you didn't offer any shortcuts. I would say in those days we had to wait for things. Everything was through snail mail. You'd send me something snail mail from Israel. I'd send you something. This was in the days where it wasn't just a quick push of a button. But what was beautiful about it, Nehemia, is that you put in place a system, if I can say a template for what it was we were learning. 4 things: the consonants, the vowels, the accents, and the Masoretic notes. We went through that. I'm not saying that at the end I'm Keith Johnson from Hebrew University, but what I realized was I was given a gift. And that gift was ultimately with a purpose. I want to tell you what the agenda was. Can I now publicly tell you?
So there was an agenda, I knew it.
There was an agenda. And the agenda was that I felt when I was watching you read the Hebrew scriptures and our relationship that we had over years, is I really started feeling really, really convicted about the people who think they know the Bible, but they don't have access to the language, history, and the context. And I thought to myself, what if there was a way that I could help people in the same way as a student you helped me? And so that's really, for those that don't know, what the agenda was. Now, in the meantime, we built a great relationship. We've been around the world together. And as a result of you saying, let's study the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew together, we did something, quick commercial for those that don't know. We wrote this book, A Prayer to Our Father, Hebrew Origins of the Lord's Prayer. I'm at the table where we spent hours.
You're at the famous table.
I'm at the famous table. We had 4 computers. We had German, Greek, Hebrew. I can't even different languages we were dealing with. And what we decided was we wanted to focus on one part of the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. Now, you do a great job explaining that. Would you please tell people what it was that we were trying to do? And we did not set out to write a book. Tell them what it was that we decided to do.
Yeah, so we sat, I said, let's study this book together. I want to get your feedback. Look, I approached the book as an expert in Hebrew. And I thought it's really important to get the perspective of somebody who doesn't just look at this as an ancient important book, but looks at it as, as a scriptural text, as, who, it's the teachings of Yeshua of Nazareth, who looks to Yeshua as you now term him as your Rebbe. So, and I don't know if everybody understands that reference, but that's okay. We talked about that in the past. So I thought that was important for me to get that perspective, because I would read something that's like, well, that's interesting. And the things that might interest me might not be interesting to the average person. Whereas certain questions that are like burning questions for people who believe in this book would be things that I wouldn't even be concerned with, or even it wouldn't register for me in a way.
Right.
That makes any sense. So I said, let's sit down and read like a defined section in the. I want us to know every single word and form and syntax and everything in the Greek and in the Hebrew and in the Aramaic. I did the Aramaic stuff, and and every possible form of that. And so we looked at what's known in the Christian world, actually in the English-speaking Christian world. It's called the Lord's Prayer, and in almost every language in the world besides that, it's called the Our Father prayer. Like in Latin, it's called Pater Noster, which means Our Father. And it's the prayer that Yeshua taught the Jewish multitudes. If Yeshua had stood before the Jewish multitudes in the Galilee and said, here's how you shall pray. First, you address the first person of the Trinity, and then you address the second person of the Trinity, and then you address the third person. I think they would have stoned him right there on the spot. Instead, he taught them to pray, and he could have taught that, right? That could have been that could have been, the how he died. It could have been, right? Instead, he taught them to pray, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, in the English. in the Hebrew, Avinu Shabashamayim, Yitkadesh Shimcha, Yitbalech Malchutcha, etc. And so we sat down and we studied this, and at the end we decided we got to share this with people.
And here's what you did that was so cool. So after we're studying, we're not trying to write a book. We're studying this prayer, one section from the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew.
Yeah.
This is Howard's book, since I don't know what year this is.
That's 1995.
This is 1995.
People can get that on nehemiaswall.com now.
Oh, awesome. Is this available?
It's available now on nehemiaswall.com. So it's not published by us. It's published by Mercer University or something like that.
So Nehemia, so then we find this prayer, we start studying it. We're not thinking about a book again. But the thing that happened that was so cool is that we said, we got to go to step 2. Now, step 2, I'm bringing you guys into the process because we used to go to a workout place and getting us the whirlpool, and we'd sit in the whirlpool and always get these revelations. So in the whirlpool, Nehemia says, you know what would be something? And he's wiping his brow. What if we took this study to the next level? You come to Israel and we go to the places where, do you remember that?
I do remember that. Yeah.
So that was way back in 2007. So we go to Israel. And again, the level of, if I can say, information, inspiration, revelation that came was phenomenal. Then we knew we had to write the book. And since writing this book, how many printings do we have here in Nehemia?
I don't even know anymore.
I mean, 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, a bunch of printings. Yeah.
And obviously,
I don't keep track of that anymore.
This is not a commercial for you to get the book, but you can get it at nehemiaswall.com or bfainternational.com.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do this. Now, here's what happens to me. After this whole process, I'm watching all the people that have been touched by just the prayer. The prayer is, if you just focused on the prayer, you could get plenty of revelation from that.
Yeah.
But I'm saying to myself, what would it mean for us to go further? Now, here's the disadvantage that I have. The disadvantage that I have is that I didn't grow up in a situation where I'm reading Hebrew all the time and learning Hebrew all the time. In fact, I finally got to the place where I started wanting to speak a little Hebrew and realized, you told me that, Keith, well, there's a difference between modern Hebrew and biblical Hebrew. I said, well, I want to focus on biblical Hebrew. So we focus on biblical Hebrew. And then after some years, I say, okay, now I'd like to do a little modern Hebrew. And I said, now will you teach me? And you said, I don't want to.
I don't want.
I don't want because אין לך סבלנות, you'd say to me.
יש לי סבלנות לדברים מסוימים,
no patience. So finally, I want to just get to the point because finally I say to myself, so if I want to go further, I'm going to have to go just a little bit further, and I don't want to bother Nehemia with it. So I end eventually going to an ulpan at Hebrew University, just 6 weeks. It's nothing like what Nehemia did, but the idea was to try to be able to get some more background, because ultimately what I wanted to do, Nehemia, is to give people a chance to interact with the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew in an authentic way. Now the controversy before we get to the questions. Here's the controversy.
Okay, go ahead.
No, don't go ahead. Please.
Look, what do you tell me the controversy? I'm gonna jump in.
The controversy is that when people get the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, they read the English, and when they're reading the English, they're like, I'm reading the actual words from the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, and I got to give the controversy. I came to a point of crisis. Over and over again, I would see that Howard would translate what I'm looking at in Hebrew, and he translated in English, and they did not fit. And I would say to you, Nehemia, why is Howard doing this? And we used to have conversations about sometimes as they're looking over Howard's shoulder, his colleagues and other people. This was a controversial book when he did it. Very controversial. We can talk about that. There were some times where he kind of tipped his hand to some theological issues rather than translating directly from Hebrew. That caused me an angst in my gut that said, how do we get what the Hebrew says into English? And then you and I have been in what would you call it, a wrestling match for some years over that?
I don't know that it was he tipped his hat to theological issues. I think it was more a matter of he came with all these presuppositions and baggage about what it should say.
Right.
And when he read in Hebrew something different, he's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. I'm just going to translate what's in Greek. And so he puts a lot of times the Hebrew translation, the English translations in parentheses. And nowhere in any of his writings does he explain what the parentheses indicate. You only know what the parentheses mean is if you read the Hebrew and you realize, oh, he didn't translate what's in Hebrew. When he put it in parentheses, he's translated the Greek, not the Hebrew.
Here's where I'm going to get in trouble. So we're going to get to your questions. So people have some questions we're going to ask you. Here's where I'm going to get in trouble.
Yeah.
I started seeing people saying they were going to help us better understand the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew, and they would simply use Howard's translation.
Mhm.
And I would
Hey,
say,
it's a good start.
it's a great start. It's an unbelievable start. But I can tell you right
It's
now,
like
without
reading the King
counting,
James version, right? I mean, if you
without
don't have
counting,
access to the
I
original
can tell
Hebrew,
you,
you
I can
should
tell
read
you
the
right
King
now,
James version.
without counting, there are many, many significant things that Howard did not translate directly from Hebrew that in many times match either with the Greek or with the presuppositions, as you say, that he came with, that are simple, that some of them are very simple, in my opinion.
Mhm.
So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be giving people a tool. Before we get to the tool, I want to get to some questions. Are you ready to answer some
No,
questions?
so look, there's this new term I heard about a year ago. The term is TLDR. Do you know what that means, TLDR, on the
Tell me
internet?
what it means.
Too long, didn't read. So it's where you give, in Hebrew we say tachlis. What's tachlis? What's the bottom line? If
Yeah.
somebody stops 30 minutes into this and they don't get to hear all the questions. So Keith Johnson, people, he has put out something that I call the Hebrew Red Letter series. We're in 27 or 17. How many weeks is it, Keith?
No, so first there was 18 episodes. Now there's going to be 17 more.
TLDR. Over 20 episodes, you can now listen and you can learn the Hebrew. I've provided the Hebrew text along with a vocalization from an expert in Israel that I was able to get for us. Hebrew text that I brought based on the manuscript, put that together with a vocalization, and you've created an interlinear, right?
Yes, there's an
I'm not
interlinear.
responsible for the interlinear. I haven't seen it even.
Not responsible for the interlinear.
So, which means it might not always be right. But hey, it's
very well maybe right.
It's better than Howard.
If it's not right, I blame my teacher.
What's that?
Okay, go ahead.
So the TLDR is they can go to bfainternational.com starting on Sunday or Friday.
No, we changed everything. Everything changes. Because of your willingness to do this Q&A, about 30 minutes ago, we actually uploaded it. Right now is a sneak peek at bfainternational.com. I'm gonna put a link.
So TLDR is going to bfainternational.com, and you can see you can actually have access to this information, which is an interlinear of the Hebrew Matthew, and you can read it and say, hey, this isn't the original Matthew, I'm going back to the Greek. Fine, but at least you've seen what the Hebrew has to say. At least
you can see what it is.
And or again, you might consider it also a valid witness to understand, another perspective. And of course, also go to nehemiaswall.com and support what I'm doing. Absolutely. We're going to be putting out a lot of exciting teachings.
Yes.
We're putting out as much as we can right now. We've put out so much that we have these live episodes that I also want to push out the Hebrew Voices to the podcast, and we're like a few weeks behind in doing that. So I guess the latest thing is going to be on YouTube, and then shortly after, hopefully on Facebook. But TLDR, bfainternational.com, nehemiaswall.com, and now for your questions.
Now here we go. So what we did was last week, and I want to thank you for this. And people were so excited that you were willing to answer some questions. So what we're doing is that as you mentioned, people are going to get a chance to focus in on the red letters, specifically the red letters. Not all Hebrew Matthew. We're focusing in right now on the Sermon on the Mount. And there were questions that people had for you. And obviously you're not in the study with us. You've already studied in depth. This is for those that are wanting not to take a shortcut. It's going to be a 17-week study. Every week you have one lesson. And I will tell you, it's not going to be easy, 17. But it's going to be, we're going to move from milk to meat. So some people have some questions, Nehemia.
What does that mean, move from milk to meat?
Oh, do you know about milk to meat?
I grew up Orthodox, so that means something very different for me. So what that means is you're going to go immediately as opposed to meat to milk, where you have to.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. Actually, this is something that Paul talks about. He's, we're no longer on spiritual milk, but we need.
Oh, okay, that's what you mean.
So the idea is that we're going to actually have a smorgasbord of information, inspiration, and revelation that people are going to do. Now, I want to say one thing before I ask the question. This is not a BFA International production. This is an invitation for joint study in the spirit of which you did with me. This is my way of giving people some of what you gave through me so that we can be in a joint study together. Every week, you got to study back and forth. And every week on Sundays, because I'm taking Sundays back from the Methodist, every Sunday is a new lesson.
Wait, are you allowed to study scripture on Sunday?
Absolutely. It's first day of the week.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Look, I once had this guy say to me that, you can't have certain church services. You can't have any kind of congregation services on Sunday, only on Saturday. And I'm like, so in the Jewish world, we have services 7 days a week.
Amen. So,
why can't
so
you have services on Sunday?
I want to tell my
Study
agenda.
on
My
Sunday.
agenda is I want to take back Sundays. Every Sunday at noon, it's going to be a new lesson for 17 weeks. We'll study together, we'll talk together, and hopefully you're going to help us answer some questions. So, Nehemia, I want to start with the first question. Folks, this is based on the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. I got
Wait, hold on, Keith. I have a statement here from somebody on the chat. It says the BFA registration link is broken. Are you going to fix that as soon as we get off?
Oh, that's hilarious.
So that will be fixed before Keith
That's hilarious.
begins Shabbat, I hope.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Question.
Well, the S2 member.
So guys, please come back in the next couple hours or days or whatever to bfainternational.com and it'll be fixed.
Don't worry. The first thing, you don't need to register. No registration. You can just start the first lesson, the first introduction, and there's no need for registration. So go to BFA International. Question number 11. By the way, S2 member says they're updating, and so it probably broke because of that.
Perfect timing.
Here it is. Nehemia, this is from our friend Rich. He says, is there anything that Yeshua taught or did that is inconsistent with the Tanakh, the big book, as it pertains to the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew? If so, what? That you know of, is there anything that he taught or did within the context of the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew?
So it's interesting. I had this conversation with a Christian Unitarian pastor, Carlos Xavier. It's on Hebrew Voices. No, it's not on Hebrew Voices. It's a program I did in his channel. I think it's called Restoration Fellowship. And he argued very vehemently that Jesus taught against the Torah. And I said, wait a minute, so you're saying he added things? Absolutely, he added things. You're saying he took away things? Absolutely, it's things that he abolished. And I said, well, you're making it really easy for me not to believe in Jesus in that case. Because Deuteronomy 13 starts out in the Hebrew 12:32, and I think in the English it's 12:32, in the Hebrew it's 13:1, and it says, all that I'm commanding you today, don't add and don't take away. And then it talks about the false prophet who will come, who God gives power to perform miracles and show signs, but he leads you away from keeping the Torah. He tells you to worship other gods, but the context there is also adding and taking away from the Torah. So if you believe that Jesus did that, well, then you had a Deuteronomy 13 problem. So I think if you look at it in the broader context of the Tanakh as well, then to say that, I think should be a theological problem for you. Not for me, but for you should be a theological problem. I don't mean you particularly. I mean somebody who says, oh yeah, I believe in the Torah. So, but to really answer the question, in other words, the question is almost like this. If we wanted to put Jesus on trial today for violating the Torah and teaching against the Torah, because that is the traditional Jewish understanding. What I was taught as a child is that Yeshu or Yashka, he was called, which is like little Josh. Yashka, he taught Israel. He was a Mesitu Mediach, which means he was an inciter and he caused people to go astray. And how did he do that? He told them not to keep the Torah anymore and to worship idols. So certainly the worshiping idols part, I don't see that in the New Testament. As far as teaching things contrary to the Torah. So when I was talking to Carlos, this pastor who is telling me that Jesus added and took away, he was, and if I've misrepresented that, Carlos, please post it in the comments and here on YouTube and make sure I get your wording right, or people go watch the video. But my takeaway from what he was saying is, yes, Jesus added, and yes, Jesus took away. I guess because he has the authority to do so. Now I'm putting words in his mouth, right? For whatever reason, he was able to do that. So he kept bringing the Sermon on the Mount, and he says, well, wait a minute, this is not what the Torah says. The Torah says you're allowed to pluck somebody's eye out if they poke your eye out. And Jesus says, don't do that. I said, well, but Carlos, do you do what it says here? And forget the Hebrew, even in the Greek, translated into English, right? It's like, have you never sued somebody? And would you never sue somebody under any circumstances? If somebody murders, your loved one, you're not going to want them taken to court. You're going to say, oh well, I'm gonna now walk 2 miles with the murderer, right? Mm-hmm. And so he admitted, okay, I think he admitted, I definitely argued that there's what we call there hyperbole, that is a certain amount of exaggeration. that is and this is just the style of speaking and writing in the ancient East, I guess in the modern East as well, and now in the White House. Um, that well, I mean, there's a certain way of expressing yourself that if you fact check it, it is not meant to be taken literally down to the, like I'll give the example I gave, which is it talks about all the vegetation was destroyed in Egypt in one of the plagues. And the next plague, it starts talking about how certain vegetation was still around. Well, wait a minute, you just said, oh, yeah, because it's what we call Eastern hyperbole. So if you take him hyper literally, yes, there might be things that he taught contrary to the Torah. But I don't know that, I mean, it says he spoke in parables, right?
Right.
Oh, wait a minute. So that was really interesting. So at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, it says he spoke as one teaching with authority.
Mm-hmm.
And the great scholar of the Hebrew background of the New Testament, Professor David Flusser, he argued that in the original Hebrew, that would have said something like, hu limed kemoshe, which could mean he taught as a ruler, but it could also mean he taught as one speaking in parables.
Hmm.
And we know he spoke in parables, whether you accept Flusser's interpretation or not. It explicitly tells us he speaks in parables. So the question, I think, comes down to how literally do you take, in particularly the Sermon on the Mount, right? So the Torah doesn't say you've committed adultery if you look at a beautiful woman who's not who's married to somebody else. Let's be specific here, right? So maybe you've coveted, right? But it doesn't say adultery. So is that teaching contrary to the Torah? Or is he using this idea of hyperbole, of exaggeration, to express certain ideas, to maybe emphasize certain ideas? Does that make any sense?
That makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Let me ask you another question.
And look, so we have this concept in Hebrew, dan lekaf zchut, to judge someone, and it's an interesting expression. It's hard to, it roughly translates as give them the benefit of the doubt. But the image there is there's a balance. Mm-hmm. You're weighing somebody's deeds in a balance. Mm-hmm. And if they're equal, if the deeds are equal, you can judge the balance for good or judge the balance for evil. Mm-hmm. And so dan lekaf zchut is to judge the balance for good. So if you wanted to judge Jesus or Yeshua for the kaf, what's the opposite of zchut here? Chovah, or chayav. Then you can find things to argue against them. Oh, he fought against the Torah. He told people that they should pluck their eyes out. It's forbidden in the Torah to pluck your eye. Okay, sure, why? But if you want to be dan lekaf zchut, I think that an argument could be made that what he taught was consistent with the Torah. Although you could say maybe there's one thing that would be extremely problematic from a Torah perspective, and that's this idea that he had the power to forgive sins. I don't know that the Torah says anywhere that there isn't a person who has that authority or will not have that authority, but also doesn't say that there is. Meaning I don't believe that the Messiah in the future, when he judges the world, will have the power to forgive sins. I think Yehovah the Father in heaven has the power to forgive sins. Does he have a representative who can exonerate somebody? Well, for sure, obviously, King Solomon was his representative on earth and called his son, and he Yehovah said he is my son, about King Solomon, and if somebody was guilty or innocent, he could proclaim that. So in that respect, maybe yeah. But so that I think also comes down to dan lekaf zchut. Are you looking to exonerate him, or are you looking to convict him? And if you're looking to convict him, you can always find something. You can find things about the prophet Elijah that you can convict him on. Mm-hmm. Can we talk about that?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me get to one more question here.
Okay, sure.
This question, it says, my question has to do with Matthew 19:3-9 and divorce.
I can't let you go on. I want to bring the example. So if you wanted to convict Moses, you could convict Moses.
Amen.
Right? You could say, God said in the 10 Commandments, don't make any graven image. And then Moses shows up before the people and he says, God told me to make these cherubs. And then God told me to make this pole with a snake on it. Right? So if you wanted to convict Moses, you could convict Moses. But I believe Moses is a true prophet and that God really told him to do that. Mm-hmm. And God is allowed to tell you to do something under specific circumstances that's contrary to the general rule. I mean,
Amen.
Yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
Permission to ask the next question?
Absolutely.
Here, let me just say something right now, folks that are listening. Now, let me stop before I ask the next question. Would there be any way that you'd be willing to do a part 2 Q&A?
I think we have to, because you spent the first 35 minutes in introduction.
We got to give the introduction. There's got to be context, Nehemia. We can't just.
Okay.
But would you be willing to do a part 2?
Absolutely, for sure.
I love you called it the Hebrew red letter Q&A. Hebrew red letters?
Can you turn your finger off? Hey,
you got to help me.
Can I read one of the questions from the audience? And I don't know what they are, right? So
absolutely.
Okay, who's Hebrew gospel here? Is that
I have no idea.
It says acharim means I will destroy. Is that right? Yes, absolutely. Acharim is from the word cherem. Chet resh mem is the root, and acharim means I will utterly destroy. Really, the word cherem appears in the context in the Torah of it talks about destroying Canaanites, and it says lahacharim, to completely destroy them. In modern Hebrew, cherem means something else. So, but that's a different story. So, for example, Exodus 22:20, whoever sacrifices to any other god than Yehovah must be destroyed. And the word there is Yahoram. It's a form of that. So that was an answer to, I think it's Matthew 5:19 is the Acharim thing. Okay, infallible proof asks a question here. Is the Torah a light? Proverbs 6:23 says the law is the light, and Isaiah 40. Okay, that's not a Hebrew Matthew question, so let's jump to Hebrew Matthew questions. All right, I'll let you ask another one because I don't see any specific questions.
Okay, so listen, let me just.
And I can't read the whole thing while we're talking.
So. Here's the deal. So, in just a matter of a short period of time, we're under attack. The registration link is broken. None of that changes anything. Here's what's exciting. We're starting the process of people learning to study the Hebrew Gospel Matthew, and I will make sure that wherever you go, people that go, you will not be held back by registration links. So here's the good news. Nehemia, you say that you would be willing to facilitate, be on the hot seat, because we've got so many questions where we could literally just start and ask questions. In fact, maybe I should send them to you in advance. Would that help?
I don't mind you sending them in advance, sure. I mean, I could probably answer them more, some of them at least more intelligibly.
Yeah.
It was interesting. I years ago when I first put out shortly after I first put out the Hebrew Yeshua versus Greek Jesus book, there was somebody who wrote a scathing criticism of it, and there was something like 85 points. And one of them was interesting. It was like George Howard says in a certain place that he was the scholar of Hebrew Matthew, that in all of Hebrew Matthew it never mentions Yeshua as the Messiah. How could you believe in a book, he says to his fellow believers in Yeshua, that says Yeshua is not the Messiah? And so I went through I don't remember, it was 70 or 80 or 90 of these points, answering them one at a time. And like an example of that one, I said, well, look, I'm not a messianic, but it says X number of times repeatedly that Yeshua is the Messiah in the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. What Howard was pointing to was in one particular book where it says Christos in the Greek, it doesn't say Mashiach in the Hebrew, but it doesn't change the overall context of dozens of times or whatever, where it says he's the Messiah in the Hebrew Matthew. So I've started putting those out one at a time, and I didn't see there was a great interest in it, so I just stopped. But yeah, I mean, some of them were good questions that required me to do some research. Like, why does it say? Okay, go ahead.
No, but what I'm hoping is this. So these people are going to be studying starting this week. They'll be studying for the week. Next week, we could have more Q&A. Now I'm not asking you to do this every week, obviously. This would be part 2 where we could spend more time on the questions. And I want to challenge people to do this because I do have a boatload of questions. When you go to the front page, you can go to something that needs no registration. You just go to the introduction of the Red Letter Series. And in that situation, for those that have registered for free, you can leave any questions for Nehemia. I want to ask you this question, Nehemia, give you a chance to answer.
Can I bring you something from Jewish history? There was a man.
I'm never going to be able to. This is impressive. I'll never be able to ask me. They're going to have 10 of these. We're going to have 10 Q&As. I'm telling you.
May it be. So there was a man in Jewish history, a rabbi named Choni HaMe'aged, Choni the circle maker. And the story is that Israel was suffering from a devastating drought. People were dropping like flies, starvation, and plague was coming because of drought. There was no rain, and we don't have a source of perpetual water like the Nile in Israel, or like the Mississippi, if there's drought, there's just the crops just don't grow, or they grow very stunted at least. And Choni went in this. He said he drew a circle famously, and he said, "God, I'm going to stand in this circle praying until rain comes." I don't know if it's a true story or not, but it's a story that's told. Every Jewish child knows the story. Choni HaMe'agel, the circle maker. We used to call him Choni HaMagad, the circle, because we didn't know any better. Choni, the circle maker. And so, Keith, would you stand with me in the circle that until the coronavirus plague leaves the earth, that we will continue, I don't know, every week, but as able that.
Wait, hold on just a minute. No, wait, just a second.
Stand in the circle and put out teachings for people who are being on lockdown, who can't leave, who are searching.
Just a second.
Would you stand in the circle with me?
Can I turn the light on?
Sure. I don't know. Why not? Yeah.
Now, Nehemia, when I tell you that I am struggling with this COVID-19 quarantine, shelter and grace, I'm struggling at my deepest level. What is keeping me going is that I have been excited to be able to share this Bible study. Now, I'm under some sort of attack. Okay. Today, the registration is broken. I can't ask a question. We're at the end of our hour. And so I'm obviously being molded, shaped, pushed. I don't know what's happening. Ever since you got me doing this, I'm thinking it's number 7. We're done now. We've done 7. Now you're asking me publicly to continue doing this. And so I would do it on one condition.
Yes.
Okay. Here's my condition. Can we, the ones that we do, that I would be participating in, can we do them before, can I do it at a time that works? Because
we'll work out the logistics.
We'll work out the logistics.
And
the other thing is, I don't want to shift, but that somehow you would be willing to share like you shared with me for these dear people who are going to be in this process. I'm not asking that this be the subject every time, but that at some point you'll give a little time for Q&A for our friends that are going to begin studying this week. There'll be a chance for them to ask questions, because a lot of people don't get access to us live. You know, they see videos and they see this, that, and the other, but the chance for people to actually interact with us while we're in lockdown, I think would be really, really huge. So people that have asked questions, we're going to give you a chance to get those questions answered. It's just that today is the beginning of a process. We're going to keep the process going. And what I want them to do is, and so I'm going to answer your question. I want them to prepare their questions, go to the introduction, doesn't take registration, or go to the contact page and send me the questions. I'll send them to Nehemia, or even go to Nehemia or Facebook. Can we open it up? Could we open it up that just people can reach you to ask?
We'll post something on Facebook where people can ask questions. That's
exactly. Let's do that, because we're going to be focusing on the Hebrew.
You guys, please try to keep the questions short. As it is, what did you get? How many pages? We can't even read them all.
They've written the whole Megillah. So here's the thing. We're going to make a Q&A section.
Can we do a thing? I heard about this. I don't know what the technology is, where people ask questions and then other people can come and vote that question up.
Really?
Is there a way to do that? Do you know that technology?
Well, you're the technology guy.
All right, we're gonna explore technology, and then if we see, hey, this question got 80 votes, and the other one is like, some like question about like, what about the spelling of the 4th king in the list of of the genealogy? All right, well, maybe we won't do that one if it didn't get votes right.
So here's the funny thing. So either way, so this is officially supposed to launch on Sunday. It'll be fixed by Sunday. Today was a sneak peek. The sneak peek is you can go to the introduction, and maybe we'll even get the registration link fixed before Shabbat. But the questions are so good, Nehemia. Some people have asked questions. I mean, it's just a minute. Can I finish this one?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then I want to end in prayer.
Absolutely. My question has to do with Matthew 19:3-9. Do you happen to have the Hebrew Matthew around there?
Yeah. Okay. Which one is it?
Matthew chapter 19:3-9, and divorce.
Uh-oh.
Does the Hebrew give any indication that Yeshua is saying anything contrary to Torah here? My immediate inclination is that the Pharisees were trying to catch Yeshua at his word, and there's no indication that they caught him, but that what he spoke was in line with the Torah. To be clear, I ask because I want to see how Matthew can be reconciled with the Torah regarding divorce and remarriage, because there's a strong argument in the Christian church that divorce/remarriage is sin. I don't by any means desire to participate in divorce. I love my wife dearly. That's our friend Scott. And these kinds of questions, Nehemia, people are so dear, the way that they're asking in respect. Do you have any thoughts regarding the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew as it pertains to Matthew 19 and the issue of divorce?
That's a great place to continue next week.
Excellent.
When we continue this, yeah, it's a great question. It's a very good question.
Okay, so let's
look, it's a question that a lot of people, if blood has been shed over that question. So I don't know that I have a magical answer, but we can definitely look at it.
And before we, I want you to know this. People are so extremely thankful for the willingness to have this dialogue. So I'm going to stick in there with you. What did you call it? The circle. Tell me again what you called it.
Choni, the circle maker. He is we're going to stand in the circle in prayer until Yehovah causes us to pass away from the earth, metaphorically speaking.
No, wait, just a minute. Let me get this clear.
It's not literally a circle in this case, but
you're asking us about this deal that we're doing with Zoom and all of this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. What is it you'd like me to be in prayer about?
Oh, to be in prayer that Yehovah will remove this plague from the earth, and until that, we will continue to share with people, information.
Got it. So we're
both people with information about the Hebrew sources of their faith.
Okay. So we're going to figure out how all of this is going forward. Okay, but let me just say right now,
This is not COVID-19.
For the initial introduction. Something shifting. I'm not sure exactly what it is. People asking these questions is really inspiring me. Putting that is huge. So there's a lot that's going on. There's a lot we got to get figured out. I do want to pray with you, and I want to thank the people that did come today. And those questions that you asked will be answered because Nehemia's agreed for another part 2 and maybe a part 3, and who knows, maybe 17 weeks.
We'll do our best. or maybe this whole thing will be over in 2 weeks. I have no idea, right? May it be.
Okay. So we're going to be in prayer about that.
Tony was in prayer for God to bring rain, to end the drought, and we're in prayer for the
Can I give good news?
For healing of the world.
Good news. A few weeks ago, Nehemia, we talked about them saying it was going to be 1 point some million, then it was going to be 100,000. We said no. Now they brought it down again to another number. We're going to say no to that. We're going to ask the Father to do a miracle that the world would know He has intervened in grace in this situation. And I'm hoping and believing and praying that would happen.
May it be. All right.
Let's pray.
Psalm 6. Yehovah al ba'apcha tochicheni v'al b'chamatcha tiasreni. Yehovah, do not punish me in anger. Do not chastise me in fury. Chaneni Yehovah ki umlal ani. Have mercy on me, Yehovah, for I languish. Rifa'eni Yehovah ki nivhalu atzamai. Heal me, Yehovah, for my bones shake with terror. V'nafshi nivhala me'od. V'ata Yehovah ad matai. My whole being is stricken with terror, while you, Yehovah, oh, how long? Shuvah Yehovah chalatza nafshi. Oh, Yehovah, return. Rescue me. Literally, save my soul. Hoshi'eni leman chastecha. Save me for your grace, for your faithfulness, because of your faithfulness. Ki ein b'mavet zichrecha, for there is no remembrance of you in death. B'sheol mi yodelach. In Sheol, who will confess you? Who will thank you? Yagati ba'anchati, asche b'chol ela mitati. I am weary with groaning. Every night I drench my bed. B'dimati el si amseh. I melt my couch in tears. Ashasha mikas eni. My eyes are wasted by vexation. Atka b'chol sararai. Worn out because of all my foes. Suhu mimeni kol po'elei aven, ki shema Yehovah kol bichi. Away from me, all you evildoers. And I pray, Yehovah, away from us, all these deadly viruses. For Yehovah heeds the sounds of my weeping. Shema Yehovah tchinati, Yehovah tfilati kach. Yehovah heeds my prayer. Yehovah accepts my prayer. Yevoshu v'yibahalu me'od kol oivai. Yashuvu yevoshu laga. All my enemies will be frustrated and stricken with terror. They will turn back in an instant, frustrated. Yehovah, turn back and make frustrated this virus. Destroy it, melt it. Yehovah, you have the power. Bring healing to the world. Amen.
And I want to pray a prayer, Nehemia, that we study together. Avinu Sheba Shemayim, our Father in heaven. Yit Kadesh Shimcha, may your name be sanctified. Vayit Barech Melchutcha, may your kingdom be blessed. Ratzoncha Yihiyeh Basui Vashemayim Uba'aretz. Your will shall be done on heaven and on earth. Vatiten Lachmenu Temidit. Give us our bread continually, daily. Umacholenu Chatotenu Ka'asher Anachnu Mohalim Lachotim Lanu. Forgive us the debt of our sins as we forgive the debt of those who sin against us. V'al tavi'enu lidei nisayon. Do not bring us into the hands of a test. V'shomrenu mikol ra, and protect us from all evil. Amen.
Amen.
Can I blow the shofar?
Please.
Amen.
Amen.
See you next week.
Shabbat shalom.